Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show today. My name is Chef Andy, and I have the privilege of introducing also Grace Maina, a food blogger and a food lover that is joining us on the show today to actually learn from what we are going to be making and of course as well share the fun in cooking. Now before I begin, of course I will begin by introducing the ingredients just to give you an idea of what to expect. Now for this very simple Viazi Karai recipe, a very local recipe from the coastal province of Kenya, we're going to be, of course, incorporating a bit of some red onions already chopped. You will also require some egg yellow food color, some coriander, some cumin powder, and some turmeric powder. You'll also require some dried parsley and some garlic powder, some fresh ginger root, and one large knob of garlic. You're also going to require some red chili powder, some garam flour, a few green chilies, some raw or some tamarind seeds, or known as ukwaju in the local terminology. You're also going to require some salt for seasoning, some fresh coriander, and about 5 peeled and washed potatoes. But before we begin, I will of course give Grace a bit of chance to breathe, as well as you guys at home. And when we do come back, we will of course both take you through the process of making this very, very simple dish. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back viewers. If you're just tuning in, we're right about ready to start this very, very local coastarian dish, and we're going to be making some very, very simple Viazi Karai. Of course that is the original name that we know of locally. And now we're going to start this very simple process by soaking, or rather infusing our tamarind seeds. So Grace, you will do us the honor of grabbing the pot right at the end.
Okay.
And you can of course throw that in there, just dump it all in the pot.
Okay.
Now one particular technique of infusing or extracting the beautiful flavors of tamarind is of course boiling it, or you can also soak it overnight and then proceed to boil it later on. But because we're doing this fresh from scratch, we'll of course begin by boiling, which is going to of course rush the process. So we're going to just add some water to this pot. And now what we're going to do is we're going to give that a few minutes to just allow for the tamarind to break down in consistency.
Okay.
So this you can just lay right at the back there. And we will just turn that on and allow to boil in a very little bit.
Okay.
All right, now next up, we're of course going to make our butter. So you will of course require a nice big bowl and a whisk. And now we start the process very, very simply by adding our garam flour. Now this is a particularly beautiful flour, as I mentioned, very, very good in that it's actually very, very good, especially for guys that are struggling with gluten, because of the fact that it is also gluten-free, makes it very easy to actually appeal to most diners, even those with food disabilities. So we're going to start by seasoning that very lightly with some salt, very important. And next up, we will proceed to add our cumin powder. So you can actually begin to work your whisk around the mixture.
Okay.
This is just basically to spread out and give it a nice, beautiful a nice beautiful consistency as well. Also helps to also break the lumps of flour. We'll also proceed to add our garlic powder. So we basically added about a teaspoon of paprika powder, about 2 teaspoons of cumin powder, and 2 teaspoons of garlic powder. And of course, once that's mixed, we're also going to infuse that with a bit of some dried parsley, about 3/4 teaspoon. Right, once you've given that a nice beautiful mixture, we are now of course going to add to that a bit of water.
Okay.
So I'm just going to help you to pour out water, and you're just going to keep mixing right up until we have the right consistency. Which of course brings me to ask, have you had a chance of trying out some Viazi Karai while you were in the coast the last time you were there?
Definitely.
And
I just have never tried them.
You just
I've
never tried making them?
Yes.
And what do you think, how difficult do you think this recipe is based on what you tasted?
It's maybe a bit complex because it's very rich in flavor. So I'm just hoping to see where this goes, and if it's easy enough, I'll try it at home.
Perfect. Now, also something to mention, viewers, a lot of the ingredients that make this very simple dish are very, very easy to acquire locally. So you can actually be able to find each of the ingredients that we already used in this recipe. Right, now, Grace, I'm just going to keep adding water, and you'll just keep mixing. And as I mentioned, a good consistency of butter is always a little thicker than pancake butter, but it should not actually be too runny, because it actually makes it impossible for us to coat our potatoes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to add a little more water. Right now, you're just going to work the sides just as we did initially, yeah. So very important to mention as well. Of course, it's always a little easier to actually add your water in little amounts, just to make sure that you're not actually going to struggle to get the mixture right the first time.
Okay.
So very, very important to always try and go very, very gentle with water. Another thing as well, always try and work with cold or room temperature water, because what happens is as soon as you add some hot water, it'll actually cook the starch in the flour, and it'll actually give it a very different consistency.
Okay.
Right, so always important to make sure to try and work with your ingredients at almost room temperature, especially when mixing your butter. And you can also be able to mix your butter early in advance. Just always be sure to give it a nice firm mixture before you proceed to add any ingredients to it. Just of course to make sure that it doesn't actually split. Right, now that looks very, very nice. So we're going to allow that to sit on the side very, very briefly. And I will of course give you the chance to cube our potatoes.
Okay.
So we're going to simply just proceed to cut this into fours. So you're just going to slice that right through the center. And then you're just going to slice that into quarters.
Okay.
And as you do so, I'm just going to proceed to grab a pot, and we are going to blanch our potatoes very, very briefly. Now, Grace, also to ask, what are the particular favorites that you enjoyed, especially in the coast? What kind of dishes were you a big fan of as a foodie while you took a chance to eat out?
I definitely enjoyed Viazi Karai, maji ya madafu. I don't know if that counts as a food, but it's definitely a very interesting thing to eat. Wali is also very interesting. Coconut rice.
Coconut rice, yeah?
Yes.
Wali wa nazi.
Wali wa nazi, definitely. I feel like I'm not sure about how I feel about the curries made in the coast, because I'm biased towards the ones which are made in the mainland.
All right.
But I also enjoyed a lot of crab and seafood.
Nice.
Definitely.
Very, very interesting.
Yes.
I've actually not had the pleasure of making crab on this show, so it actually gives me an idea of something to look forward to in the future.
You should try crab or calamari. It's a very interesting dish.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you of course haven't tried it yourselves, I do recommend, do have a look around. There are some very, very beautiful recipes to these different cuts of meat, and the varieties are very, very many. I won't even be able to mention half of them on the show because the list is quite endless. All right, now before we add our potatoes into our water, I'll of course begin by adding some salt. This will of course aid in bringing the temperature of the, actually something I could share with you today. One particular thing that happens when you add salt to water is it actually comes to the boil a little faster. Did you know that?
Oh, no, I didn't.
So that's a pointer you can take home today. By adding salt to water, it actually it actually allows for your water to come to the boil much faster than if you boil your water with nothing in it.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so it actually saves you the time as well. All right, so very simply, we are going to blanch these.
Okay.
So we're pretty much going to cook this halfway. So I'm just going to proceed to drop those in there. And you can now proceed to grab a bit of our coriander leaves, which we're going to be chopping very, very shortly. I'll just do you the honor of turning that board right around so that you have a nice, clean, dry surface.
Okay.
Right, there we go. So you can proceed to give that a nice fine chop. And as she does that, I will also mention you can of course use some leftover potatoes if you have maybe some cooked potatoes that you had a little earlier in your refrigerator. And it's also a very good way of making use of some ingredients that you may have left over in your fridge. So if you do have some potatoes, maybe you are doing fries the night before and you have some potatoes left over, you can of course be able to recreate this dish very, very simply from your very own home kitchen. Right, now we're going to add that to our butter. So you can just add that in here. And now what happens is the coriander gives it a nice, beautiful fragrance. And it's also going to aid in giving us a nice, beautiful burst of color.
Okay.
But then also very importantly, I don't know if you took time to actually notice the color of the Viazi Karai the last time you had some. I don't know if you noticed it
like
was
a rich yellow.
A rich yellowish color. Good. Now, if you actually notice that, then you will know then that is the reason why we have some food color on the show today.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to put just a little bit because this will actually color very much. So it's a very, very small pinch. But always be sure to try not to touch the food color by hand because it could actually stain your fingers and you may actually have to walk around with colored fingertips for a while.
Okay.
So very important to make sure, especially when you're working with food color, try and use gloves or maybe use a teaspoon to move the mixture into the bowl. That way you will actually not have colored fingertips. So you can proceed to give that a mix. And at this stage, we're basically going to add it little by little right up until we get the color that we're looking for. And you can also alternatively dilute some of this into a bit of water. And it should actually also be easy to just add that directly to the mixture. So this is not colored yet. We're going to add just a little bit more. So you should actually notice a color change very, very shortly as soon as we just have enough of it in there.
It's actually starting to show.
Yeah, you can actually see the streaks of orange, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, now something also to mention, if you can't also be able to find some food color at your retail regular stores, you can also just go around and maybe use a little bit of turmeric. It may not, of course, give it that bright orange color, but you will, of course, have a little bit of color which is also still nice and appealing. Now you can actually just maybe tilt the bowl and show it to the camera in front of us, just for the viewers to be able to see the change in color. And you can also be able to correct the color very simply by using a clear bowl such as the one we're using. It will also make it very easy for you to actually get the color right, in that the bowl actually allows a bit of light from the front, which allows for you to really see the color once it comes through. All right, now once that is done, we are going to add just a little bit of some chili powder, and this is just to bring up a bit of heat in the mixture. So you can just give that a mix once more. And as I mentioned, especially if you're looking at giving it quite a kick, especially at this stage, you can of course chop your chilies at this stage and add them in there, or you can actually just chop them and serve them on the side with your dish.
Okay.
Right, so to that we are also going to be grating in a bit of ginger. But one particular tip I like to share, very important that you add this a little bit closer to the cooking time, because it will actually infuse and it will be a little more pungent. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grate some of this on the side there on our chopping board. And while you do so, I'll just grab my pestle and mortar, and I'll also proceed to pound down a bit of some garlic. Now, I also wanted to find out, Grace, among the different places that you visited in Mombasa, what kind of scenario did you experience, especially around the Viazi Karai vendors? Maybe something that you remember that you saw around them when you actually approached them. Is there any particular thing you noticed around them? Maybe a sauce or a dip that they served with the potatoes once they served them?
They have this sauce, I believe, that they serve with the Viazi Karai. I'm not sure what it is.
Good. Now, just to mention, the sauce she's talking about is the tamarind that we're going to be working on shortly. So as we allow that to continue just absorbing a bit of water, we are of course going to put that onto the boil just as soon as the potatoes come out, just to be able to also give a nice beautiful ratio of timing right in between the cooking process. But in the meantime, I'm just going to finish peeling off my garlic, and I'm going to just go straight and add that into the pestle and mortar. Very important to take off the skins as you prepare your garlic. And something else I also wanted to share with you, have you ever actually tried cooking and had a very strong garlic aroma sticking to your fingertips, especially after touching garlic?
Every time.
Have you ever actually taken a chance to figure out how to get rid of the smell from your hands?
I always thought lemon water works.
Lemon water is a good alternative. You can also use a bit of vinegar. So any particular acid, and it could actually be the commercial kind like white or apple cider vinegar. It's a good option. You can of course also slice a lemon in half and then just rub it on your fingertips and around your hands, back and forth. And it will actually help you to get the aroma off your fingertips completely. And that's something, it's actually something I realized over time. There's endless times that I've actually realized cooks at home try to make a meal with garlic, and you actually have this very, very potent garlic aroma on your fingertips right through your dinner and all the way to bed. So it's actually a very, very good technique to get it off your hands. I've also had this, but it's actually, I think, old housewives' tale that some actually use a bit of warm milk.
Oh.
Yeah, it actually works. I actually gave it a try once and I pretty much didn't do it again because, of course, the fact that it is milk and you actually feel a little guilty wasting all that milk on your hands. Yeah. So lemon would be the easiest, cheapest method to go with.
Definitely.
Yeah. Right, so we are almost done with our preparation. You're just going to proceed to help us to pound down our garlic.
Okay.
And of course, I always like to add a bit of salt into the pestle. Right, now you can continue to just pound that into a nice, beautiful, consistent mince. And as Grace does so, we are of course going to take a break at this stage. I will also just take some time now to actually get our tamarind going. So I'm also just going to turn this on. And we're just going to allow this to come to the boil. This should actually continue to do so for anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes. By then your chunk of tamarind will actually break apart. You should actually be able to see the mixture turn into a chocolatey brownie consistency. And that will of course call for us to stop. But before we get there, a small break, and we'll see you in a very little while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for those of you who missed out on what we did in the previous set, I and Grace worked on some very, very beautiful things. We started by working on our beautiful butter to her right, and we're pretty much now completely done with our ukwaju, or our tamarind sauce. So as you can be able to see from the cameras, it's looking almost like a chocolatey consistency, very, very thick. Now, Grace, what we're going to proceed to do next is we're now going to take out the seeds, because we're only going to be using the liquid. So I'm going to hand you a spoon. Right, so what we're basically going to do now is we're just going to strain the mixture. So I'm just going to begin by scooping this into your sieve. And you're basically just going to use your wooden spoon to just push the mixture through the sieve, right up until the mixture is almost completely dry from the top. How's the aroma coming through for you?
It's very wonderful.
Now you at least now have an idea of how easy it is to make ukwaju. It's very, very simple.
And where do you get it from?
This you can actually be able to find at markets within the city. I will of course recommend any particular market areas that have a lot of Indians shopping around those areas. They're particularly very fond of using tamarind and other ingredients like pomegranate. So you may not be able to find this in a supermarket, but you should actually be able to find it in its raw form even in the local markets.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, another thing, they may also not know it by the term tamarind, but once you mention ukwaju, you should actually be able to find it very, very quickly.
Okay.
And it's not actually an expensive product. I think you should be able to get about 300 grams for about 100 shillings. So it's actually not an expensive product. Some of us, of course, or rather a lot of home viewers may actually think that it's very expensive, but it's actually not. Yeah. There we go. So that nice, beautiful brown liquid is what we're looking for. And what happens is, you can actually be able to find tamarind sauce already in supermarkets, it's already in the extracted form. But one thing I always insist, it's always fresher when you do it yourself, because you can't actually match the flavors, especially with one that's sat on the shelf compared to one that you actually did yourself from scratch. Right now, just to pour out the rest of the mixture. And also to mention, remember, you can actually also extract the same, add a little bit of sugar to it, and it actually makes a very, very good juice. So you can actually put a bit of sweetener in it. It's very, very good to consume that way. It's actually a very, very good oxidant remover in your system, and you can actually use it to clean your
system.
Exactly. Right now, Grace, as you may be able to tell by this point, you can actually not be able to get any more liquid out of it. But also a very, very important thing to always do, especially when straining through, always just give it a shake, and then using your spoon, just run it right underneath. You will, of course, get an almost thicker, consistent tamarind pulp that is at the bottom. And this is pretty much what will thicken the sauce.
Okay.
Right, so once that's done, of course, this has no purpose after this. We're just going to discard this completely. Right, now our tamarind is pretty much ready to go. So you can actually just give that a mix. And you should actually be able to feel the consistency. It's almost very, very heavy now. Now, a lot of times you will, of course, experience instances where if you add too much water, you may actually need to put it back on the pot and then cook it a little longer to thicken. But because we had a beautiful ratio of water to tamarind pulp and tamarind seeds, this is actually now good to go. But one particular good way to finish that off, very important to also thicken it a little bit. So this is where we're actually going to be adding our onions. So you can mix that through. And the onion basically just gives it a nice, beautiful burst of flavor. And it also helps to really allow, the onion juices will actually allow for it to also get a nice pungency to it. And then, of course, very importantly, always season with just a little bit of salt. This will, of course, also bring out the natural sweetness of the tamarind. So just the same way you add a bit of salt to chocolate and it gets sweeter, does the same thing for tamarind.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, now that is now complete. We are now, of course, going to go on to the next step, which is cooking our potatoes. So I'm just going to sit that at the back. And I will ask you, of course, to do us the honor of turning on the gas.
Okay.
Should be the second one, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so as she proceeds to do so, I'll also just bring you up to scratch for those of you who are just tuning in. We've pretty much managed to finish making our batter for the potatoes. We've also managed to extract our tamarind juice, and we're going to be using that just to accompany this very simple dish. But we're of course now going into the last and final process, which is cooking the Viazi Karai. So I'm of course just going to run my whisk around it once more. This is of course to make sure that your liquid and your butter did not split, making sure that everything is still intact. And at this stage we'll proceed to add about a whole teaspoon of minced ginger, and of course our garlic. Right, now you can give that another mix once more. Right, easy as that. Now next up, we're of course going to go ahead now and begin the process of cooking the potatoes. So you can now grab this small spoon.
Okay.
I find it much easier to move the potatoes from here with a spoon, particularly for the fact that it may slip and fall into the oil. Right, so once your potatoes are nicely cooled off, remember these are halfway cooked for those of you who are just tuning in as well. We pretty much just cut this into quarters, blanch them very, very slightly, and we're allowed to cook them almost halfway. So now all we are going to do is dunk those right into our butter. And you're just going to toss them around in there, give them a nice round coating. I'm actually going to give you, yes, of course, taking, of course, precaution not to break them. So just be very gently. You actually just almost just moving the sauce right around the potato without lifting the potato from the mixture.
Okay.
Right, so for this particular process, remember the fact that they're chunky may actually require for you to leave them in there a little longer, but it also gives you a bit of time to allow them to also infuse with the flavors in the butter.
Yeah.
Remember, for instance, the garlic and ginger went in a little later, so it's actually going to continue to just emphasize on flavors. It sits in there. And you can pretty much continue to add one by one as you continue, because they are going to sit in there for a little bit. Right, just like that. And also something else you can also do, there's instances where you actually may encounter chances of the potato not coating properly.
Yeah.
So one particular technique I also learned through working with potatoes in this recipe, you can also pass them through a bit of flour. The flour will also aid in getting them to stick, but I wouldn't recommend using all-purpose flour. You can actually use the same garam flour. Just dust a little bit on the potatoes. It'll actually help to give a very, very thick coating, of course, if you're looking at making them very, very chunky.
Okay.
Right, so now you can proceed to add one by one in the pot. Of course, making sure to maybe work in one direction from one point, and then just give a little bit of space as you do so, just so that they get a nice even cooking. Just like that. Now you can just dump them around in a circle, and we're just going to allow for them to cook until they've got a nice, beautiful golden brown or almost golden orange color to them. And now as Grace continues, I will also mention, remember you can of course add many more ingredients to your batter, especially if you're looking at having it more spicy. You can of course calibrate your recipe, maybe double up on the spices. It will also give it a very, very strong heat factor, especially if you're going to add more chili powder to it. You can also improve the flavor by also chopping up a bit of your chilies, and that will give it a very, very strong kick of heat. But if you're of course going to be serving this to kids, or you're going to be serving it to guests at your table who are not particular fans of chili, I will always insist you can actually have your chili on the side, and they can pretty much add as they continue. You can also infuse a bit of the chili into your tamarind sauce by just chopping your chili finely and mixing it in there. And pretty much by the time the sauce comes to a cooling, as it continues to cool off, it will of course continue to infuse and improve in flavor. Right now, as those continue, very important to always have somewhere to transfer them to once they're cooked.
Yes.
So a bit of some parchment paper and a pair of tongs will do so for you very nicely. And we're just going to repeat the same for the rest of our potatoes, working all the way to the very end. So what's your take on Viazi Karai now that you've managed to actually touch them and do them by hand?
They don't seem as complicated as I thought they would be. It's actually quite easy once you've learned how to extract the ukwaju. I feel like that's a very essential step. But so far, it's a very easy home recipe that you can try at any given time.
Yeah, and also to mention, remember, all of the ingredients we've used today were actually purchased at a very local market, which means if we can be able to find them, I believe you all can be able to do so. But of course, do make a point of looking around different markets in the city. Remember, not all products are always sold in the same location, so you actually may be able to find some of the ingredients on one side of town, and you may actually find the rest on a different part of your neighborhood. Right now, we're just going to give that a quick look. Now these are nicely coating away. And now the only thing that we're basically looking for here is just for a nice consistent butter. It should actually almost resemble the same consistency that you'd have when you're making your bhajias. And this can actually start to come out of the heat. So I'm just going to pick out a piece just for you to have a look at. And as you can see, I don't know if that's the same thing that you saw in the coast.
Yes.
Very similar, yeah?
Very similar.
All right. Now you're going to do us the honor of taking those out one by one. Now also to mention, Viazi Karai are particularly very good for appetizers, especially in the late evening or maybe just before dinner if you're hosting guests. They're also a very, very good, a good biting, especially if you have kids around and maybe you're looking at a very light snack just before dinner. This actually go well. And even on occasion, while I took a bit of a tour of Mombasa, I realized you can actually be able to make this in advance and even serve them in the early morning. Some prefer them cold. You can actually also preheat them very, very quickly in the oven before serving in the morning. And they'll actually go very, very well with some cardamom tea, which is pretty much what you'll find in most coastal homes. All right, as you can see from the cameras there, a nice beautiful touch of orange there. Of course, if you do this with turmeric, you may actually have a brighter yellow color, but with, of course, the addition of a bit of the food coloring, you will, of course, get a nice, beautiful burst of color every single time. All right, so we can now turn that off. We can, of course, hold this back for now. And it's as easy as done. So we'll, of course, now go straight onto the plating. And for these, I'm actually going to allow you to plate them whichever style you like. You can set them on you can pile them up in the center of the plate. You can lay them in a straight line. Anything goes.
Anything goes.
Anything goes.
Okay.
Now, something also to share with you, especially for those of you who may not be accustomed to eating coated or buttered potatoes. Remember, you can also change the technique that we used. You can also slice them into maybe some thick slices, of course resembling the same shape as bhajias. You can also probably even boil your potatoes whole, and you can be able to also coat them and cook them bigger into bigger chunks. But remember, by doing so, you will of course need a little bit more oil to be able to cook them right, to get a nice more even cooking. Or maybe even use a deep fat fryer, which of course has a little more content of oil to it, and it actually will be able to give you a nice coating right through. Perfect. I'm just going to help you move those to the center, because our plate is pretty much nice and big, so I'm just going to pile those right in the center like that. And you can now grab the sauce right behind you. And for this, we're just going to finish those off very, very simply, the very simple way I know how. Now, normally, if they serve this to you in Mombasa, they'll probably give them to you in a small container or a small sachet that you can carry around and eat as you go. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to hand you the spoon. Okay. And you can proceed to just drizzle a bit of the ukwaju all over the place. Of course, giving it a nice, generous drench, right around the top.
Around the top of the...
Everywhere. Okay. Just make it nice and colorful. Simple as that. You can actually give about 3 or 4 more.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. So you can also drizzle a bit of the sauce right around the plate. Remember, they actually become very, very dry. Oh. So you may actually, especially when you counter chances of eating, you may actually want a bit of sauce to dip it in on the sides. Perfect. And also right around the other side. Simple as that. Very, very simple garnish to finish that very simple dish. A nice, beautiful piece of chili. And we're pretty much done.
It's very interesting to
Very
read.
interesting, yeah?
Yes.
Now, of course, very importantly, I will, of course, need you to give that a taste. So I'm just going to hand this to you. And you can give it a taste and tell us if you still have that beautiful feeling you had the last time you had those in the coast. What do you think?
It's more natural.
More natural and fresh as well. Perfect. So ladies and gentlemen, I believe Grace has pretty much proved that you can actually be able to get the beautiful sensation of a coastal dish right in your very own home kitchen here in the city. And as I mentioned, all the ingredients that we used today were actually sourced at a very local market, so you should actually be able to get your hands on each and every one of these ingredients locally. But from the studios, I have come to the last and final part of the show, where I will of course bid you farewell. And until the next episode, do have a lovely evening. God bless you all, and see you soon.